I thought they talked about. There were discussions on epistemology, which you and I were talking about before.
Oh yeah.
And what I'd like to come back to.
Sure.
And there was a feeling that Peterson was more of a pragmatist, and you guys are more into correspondence theory, and Mohammad Hijab's more into correspondence theory. And I remember when you and I spoke, you said to me, so you agree with correspondence theory, and I queried that, and then we lost that thread and didn't continue. We could come back to that at some point.
What would be good, Tony, is you cover, say, epistemology. We go back and forth, whether we agree or disagree, then we go to the next topic.
Yeah, well, let me give you the others just so you know. Then there was how much the second, so the first one was epistemology. The second one was how important the objective truth of something in a religious book is relative to its mythological impact. So Peterson took Cain and Abel, and he went, yeah, it may have happened as a physical event, but what may be even more interesting, and I agree with him, is that it's a psychological archetype for the human condition. It's a perennial story of the human psyche. Yeah? So how much is it important where something objectively actually happens, whereas how relative to its mythological value and merit, yeah?
I like that.
Okay, so that's another point of contention, where I'm an extreme liberal.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's all about the mythology and the story, and I don't even particularly care about the objective stuff so much. What else came up? Because then I got confused. I don't know what you thought with their view of postmodernism. They seem to come to a point where they agreed that postmodernism meant querying how you know anything in the first place. Like the phrase, the question was asked, how do we know God exists? Peterson went, well, it depends what we mean by the key words like know, you, God, yeah? And he and Mohammad Hijab seemed to concur that this was sort of a postmodern trend towards deconstructing words. And here I fell apart with both of them, because to me that's healthy skepticism, not postmodernism.
Yeah, so let's discuss that, because I have some thoughts on that. Quite strong thoughts.
Do you want to hear the others as well or not?
We
can remember them and come back.
So how many is it? A, B?
Epistemology, the truth of objectivity versus mythology, definitions of postmodernism, the elephant in the room we don't need to go to, what the hell, consensus version of truth, that's a deep one, forget it.
Let's start. We'll see how it rolls, because we've got about 2 hours. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So where would you like to go on any of that?
If you could stand there. Sorry, what's your name? Christian. Good to meet you. Sabul.
Yeah. And the last thing.
If you stand a bit closer, because or we can get you to wear a mic.
Yeah. Sure. You got a mic. Sorry, I haven't got one. We'll be picked up. I can give you one. We're good. Are we good? Okay, I'll stand like this and we'll kind of. The last of the four things, so we've got three. The fourth thing, the thing that I personally love, was near the end Peterson gave a narrative view of Christianity as telling the ultimate tragedy of the human condition. And I think there he's bang on board. Yeah, he said it's the most frightening thing we can look at as told in the story of Christ. And I really love that Mohammad Hijab seemed to respond to that and see merit in it, yeah? Because to me that cuts to the heart of why Christianity has such power and should be taken seriously. It's not deconstructing the Trinity and all this stuff. It's seeing what Peterson's revealing in that insight, and I love that Mohammad Hijab responded to that positively. So as a meeting of minds on common themes, it was all great, and I was more than happy.
And it would be nice if you start off with why you enjoyed this rather than the second one.
You mean rather than the
second one rather than the first one?
Well, I'm trying not to be negative if I don't have to be.
No, it's fine.
In truth, should I be really, really truthful? I'll be really, really truthful. I actually thought that maybe the Peterson-Mohammad Hijab thing was never going to happen. Part of me suspected it might be a height, okay? And I like Mohammad Hijab, I'll say that now, having spoken with him privately off camera. I actually think he's a very nice guy, okay? But I suspected it might have been hype, so I was really surprised when it happened, okay, to be honest. When it did happen, I was really excited for it, and then I found there was no chemistry at all. I didn't think that anything particularly contentious was touched on. I thought Peterson wasn't digging in the way he normally does, he was just listening, which he's an advocate of, he says I want to listen. And I thought it was very brave of Mohammad Hijab to do the singing and all of this stuff, but essentially that I didn't think there was much philosophical meat in it.
Sure.
This one, I think there was a lot of philosophical meat, and there was chemistry, and it was all good, and that was the difference.
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
What do you think?
Yeah, fantastic. Let's, should we begin?
I thought we had.
Oh, I thought we had. Okay, no, because the way we wanted to start it was may be better to categorize the points and say we're going to cover A, B, C, D. We're going to cover epistemology, correspondence theory, something about Christ. The last
we
thing.
had the objective truth versus mythological truth, where is more value, and definitions of postmodernism that you and I seem to have.
Fine.
Mine doesn't have a handle. Should I put it in between the two? Or
Yeah,
it doesn't have.
I can hold it.
Remember the deconstruction.
Can I put this here? Just want to make sure it doesn't drop. I'll hold it in my hand.
Always want to just defer to dictionary definitions. Really? So listen, dude, if you want to sort of steer the conversation, I've given you what's on my brain, but I'm quite tired, frazzled. I'm doing stuff that I've got legal stuff, so I might not be as fluent.
That's all right.
So I can trust you to...
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's start off with the first point, which was the chemistry of this one was better than the last one.
Yeah.
Do you think that's due to the first one being perhaps an ice-breaking session?
Yeah.
And the second one is like, okay, they understood each other and there was mutual respect. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
And again, as I've said, I like Mohammad Hijab, having spoken to him off camera. I found him a very different person off camera, potentially it's the way he may come on the camera. And I thought after the first one, there may have been quite a lot of negatives about Mohammad Hijab fed into Peterson's ear, based on other things that had happened, which you're probably aware of.
The elephant in the room.
Right. So I was really quite surprised to see Jordan Peterson re-engage, because Mohammad Hijab had one with his daughter, and that was highly fractious, So I thought a lot of stuff would have fed back, and I was...
I'm sure he saw that.
Huh?
I'm sure he saw that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he saw that. I'm sure he had a chat with his daughter. I'm sure a lot of people were saying to him, this guy's very contentious and you may have misread him. So the fact Peterson went back, I commend him for, but the fact that it then went so well and he seemed to actually have a chemistry with Mohammad Hijab and respect the fact that he is quite an, he said, you're not an agreeable guy, you're a disagreeable guy, but Peterson can see some merit in that as well. Now, I'm not saying I'm always flying the flag when anybody, including Mohammad Hijab, is disagreeable, because I'm not. But the fact that you can appreciate that has its place. I like in Peterson, so that surprised me.
Okay, good. So on that point, I think let's just begin off with the mindset that Jordan Peterson went into the discussion. I think the first one, he didn't know who the guy was.
Yeah.
And the second one's, here's somebody who totally comes from a different tradition, totally disagrees on some points in a very strong way, and is being honest.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the problems that people like Peterson have is they don't like someone who has an agenda, who's trying to hide what they're doing. So very clearly, Hijab was saying to him that you should accept Islam. Yeah. Hijab was saying to him, this is why Islam is true. Hijab was saying to him, your critique in this particular area is incoherent. And that kind of direct, blunt criticism is refreshing for most people. I think that's why they had a chemistry.
I'm not clear where he was up front saying your critique is intelligent.
No, as in when Hijab asked, do you believe in God? And he said, it depends what you mean by the words
you and do.
Yeah.
Even do, he took issue with,
which was a bit, and believe.
And believe, and God. And he's totally correct, but what interested me then...
Okay, no, but let me just explain why that was incoherent, why Hijab was rebuffing that point. Because when it comes to things like studies about STEM, about science, technology, and engineering and mathematics, he would use evidence from that against feminists. So he would say, no, women, they have the choice, but they refuse to go to these particular universities. Here's the data, very clear-cut evidence. But when it comes to these questions, he's being pedantic about what does this term mean, what does that term mean, but he doesn't apply that same criteria to when he's discussing things with feminists. And that is what Hijab was calling a postmodern, you're going all postmodern now, you see. And I like the fact that he challenged him on that.
I do, but I thought they both concurred it was a postmodern thing to do.
However, what Hijab was raising is, why are you doing it in this context?
Okay, I could answer that. I don't have a problem answering that at all, because I think when you're talking about feminist activity in the 21st century. You can measure it objectively. Feminists are objects in an objective world. You can get to core facts, yeah? There are facts to be dug up. When you're talking about God, God is ineffable. The same constraints do not apply. You have to question your own epistemology more, because ultimately, I would argue, your epistemology can't grasp God. God is ineffable. And it's God is not the same as a feminist.
No.
They're on a very different plane.
I see what you're saying, but it doesn't explain the fact that he's being asked a question about his beliefs, which are yes or no, which are quite simple. And instead, he sort of meanders off into what does this mean, what does that mean? Do you see? That's the problem here. If he said, okay, what I mean by belief is X.
Yeah.
What I mean is the tripartite, what's called the Aristotle sort of definition of knowledge, right? So knowledge, true justified belief. He could have said, okay, this is what I mean. According to that, yes or no, I believe in God or I don't believe in God. Instead, he just went off into definitions and then didn't address the question. I think that's.
I know why it can look that way, but this cuts to the
And
chase.
he took a lot of flack for that online from everybody, from Christians, from atheists.
I wouldn't support that flag. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm in a camp where I think, as I said, God is ineffable. I think epistemology and knowledge and asking yes/no questions can take you to a certain point. It's a very valuable tool, but there's a pre-intellectual, a priori condition of instinct, which is essentially mystical and undefinable, and I wouldn't expect to be able to nail reality down at that level.
Okay,
Whereas you seem to think that you can. Conservative religious people seem to think that they can literally, cognitively, almost mathematically and logically dissect the whole metaphysics, and I assume that the metaphysics is built with a mystical strata at the top, and that you can use inference and logic to carry you a certain height up there, but at the very highest echelon you're going to move on faith, which is how it should be, which is why you need faith.
So I don't disagree in some of what you're saying. What you're basically referring to is what philosophers call academic throat clearing. So you're basically clearing the air with what the definitions actually mean.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't negate the duty that you have to address the question that you're being asked, which is very clear. And the question is, and we're going to need some. Yeah, we'll probably need one. Actually, I'm good for.
I'm good.
I don't really have a problem with you.
I do have a problem. Okay, there's frontline debating now.
Just when we're getting juicy.
This is in the trenches discussion. Get
It
under
is.
the brolly.
It is.
Let's go. So, I honestly don't think I'm ducking the question.
No, I'm not saying you're ducking the question. I'm saying Peterson could have had that academic throat clearing. For example, do you remember that conversation, Tony, do you remember that conversation we had over there?
Yeah.
What you did in that conversation, and it's online, it's very clear for anybody to see, you went through your academic throat clearing, and then you were clear on what your stance is. With Peterson, he didn't do the second part. That's what I mean.
Clearing, do you mean define your terms?
Go beyond defining your terms. You made it clear that you believe it's pragmatically useful to believe in God, and you were very clear on that.
Actually, I'm not sure I did. Are you inferring that because I seem to be refuting correspondence theory, that therefore I must be accepting
No,
pragmatism?
when you said that your entire view of God is that you don't see it in black or white terms of whether God exists, but you do believe it's useful to believe in God, it's instrumentally useful. And
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's the sum of its potential merit. It means
I'm not
at
saying
minimum it has pragmatic utility.
Yeah.
I think it's deeper than that.
No, it is, but what you did is you explained this is your belief, that you believe it to be useful, and therefore people who actually believe in God are going to have, say, better lives, right? Peterson doesn't, he alludes to that, but it's almost like he hides his beliefs. He keeps his cards close to his chest. He's not clear on where he stands. So for example, is he a Christian? If I was to ask you if he's a Christian, actually let's ask Christian because he's supposed to be having a conversation with us. Would you say that Jordan Peterson is a Christian?
In the sense that I think he sees the fundamental value in the more mythological and transcendental, say archetypal framing of a lot of those texts, the New Testament, the Old Testament, and so on. I think he sees a value there as a psychologist.
Right.
I don't know whether he believes, for example, in Jesus Christ, the person, or that a lot of the Old Testament, the stories from the Old Testament, that they're necessarily true.
Right.
I think he's probably more of a pragmatist than
So
someone.
he can't technically be a Christian.
No, I think you're preempting a definition of being a Christian. You're thinking that you can define the box everyone has to sit in, and if somebody goes, no, I see profound merit in this narrative outside. If you look at it from outside that particular box, you then deny them the right to assert that particular perspective and faith.
I agree, but there are limits, though.
There are limits, but
So I'm saying, look, you can't always say, you can't get 5 Christians and always get them to agree what is the definition of Christianity. What you can do is the negation, which is they don't believe in Ganesh.
yeah, sure.
So you can do that. So with him, he's not clear in his position. And that's what I think, for example, I was watching this channel, I think Majority Reports, I think it's Atheists, and they were picking up on that conversation where he's being asked about God, he's not answering. And then many different people, Christians, Muslims, atheists, that's one of the main things shared from the video, that he doesn't answer the question. A lot of people are frustrated at that.
Okay, I disagree. I think he's totally answering the question. It's just he wouldn't concur with the context within which the question is framed. And this was touched on in their discussion about Cain and Abel.
Right.
You remember?
Yeah.
He gave the example of Cain and Abel.
Happening.
Now, you can look at the Cain and Abel story 2 ways. You can look at it from, and they're both valid. You can look at it from the point of view of, historically, did it happen as a point of objective reality? Sorry, yeah? Or you can, and Peterson said you can look at it that way, but the second way to look at it is it's describing the eternal conflict in the human psyche, yeah? That it's psychologically an eternal verity. It's archetypally true. So if you accept it's got those two properties, the archetypal truth of the human condition and the historical objective fact, and then you triage them and go, which do we think is of more spiritual merit in terms of helping me to live my life, yeah? In terms of us addressing the human condition. I think the eternal archetypal aspect of it is more potent and more relevant. So, in other words, if the historical truth turned out to be the case but the archetypal story had no merit, it wouldn't be of much interest. However, if the archetypal story has merit, just because the historical truth doesn't, it doesn't downgrade the merit of the story. So he is focusing totally on the impact of the narrative at an archetypal, Jungian kind of level. And the story he gave of the Christ story, his perspective on Christ as being the ultimate horror story of the human condition, I think cuts to the heart of what a lot of Christians may be unconsciously sensing, even if they're not articulating it that way. The fragility of the human condition, and that you have to confront the worst. Yeah? And Christianity does a rather uniquely good job of that. I'm not saying to the exclusion of any other religions, they all touch on this, but Christianity with the symbol of the cross and the crucifixion, as he pointed out, really does push that in your face and go, stare at the horror of your condition. And I think God's agreeing with me on this.
No, the powerful
I think
thunder.
in like a formal orthodox view in Christianity,
Yeah.
the view that so many religious
You need to come a bit
Christians
closer.
and Muslims take, obviously I'd say that Christians don't believe him to be.
You might as well come in.
Yeah, you
You're gonna,
Okay, yeah.
otherwise you're the back of the head.
Yeah, got you.
Okay.
So I can see where there are going to be differing opinions about Peterson's orthodoxies, but this is Catholic. But I think you're very it's true. I think there are so many adumbrations and levels